morning. So delighted to be here with you this morning to talk about the changes that we've introduced to ITV over the last number of years. Primarily, what I'm going to talk about today is how we've productized our supply chain, how we've made our data more visible, and how we're taking advantage of the cloud as a platform to enable that. So ITV, if you're not aware, is a owner, producer, and broadcaster of content. But our vision is actually to be more than TV, to build upon our creative and commercial strengths. As an integrated producer-broadcaster, we create, distribute content to multiple platforms globally. We're also diversifying our business by taking advantage of consumers' desire to engage in great content on ITV through our direct-to-consumer business. In our broadcast and online business, we operate the largest family of commercial channels in the UK, so we deliver content through transmission, but also with our video-on-demand service, the ITV Hub. Our main channel in ITV is the largest commercial channel in the UK, and over 98% of all commercial audiences, over 5 million, are on it. We generate revenue directly from consumers, as I mentioned, through SVOD services, such as the ITV Hub. And we also have a joint venture with the BBC in the US, with BritBox, and we'll be launching a service in the UK as well. Some of you might be more familiar with Circus, which we have an equity stake in, which brings British content to the Nordics, Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. Our studios business have a large presence around the world, and we create content not only in the UK, but in 12 different countries. And global entertainment, as part of studios, sell finished programs and formats around the world. At ITV, I'm responsible for the technology systems, which take content into ITV and then distribute it to linear and non-linear platforms. Also look after the simulcast of feeds to partner platforms, as well as our own platform, and Andrew will talk more about that soon. Over the course of a year, we'll distribute about 25,000 assets to linear transmission. We've got a growing digital archive of about 60,000 assets at the moment, and we deliver about 400,000 files to VOD platforms every year. The supply chain also distributes about 23,000 files internationally. This, of course, didn't happen overnight, and you go back to probably about 2013 when we originally started to look at how we modernize our supply chain. And at that time, a lot of the sourcing and distribution of content was handled by suppliers, which meant we didn't have great visibility of what was happening, what was flowing through our supply chain. Investments had been made in high-speed networks and storage, and luckily the standardization that came from the DPP meant that it was going to be much simpler for us to introduce our own file-based supply chain. So we set up our first agile product team within the broadcast space in ITV and introduced VidiSpine as an asset management system, and we started to transcode content for our non-linear platforms. We orchestrated this with a workflow tool called Mio and integrated those three products using the microservices architecture. But how we use them has changed over time. And actually, Mio was later replaced as a product with our own orchestration using microservices. And I think that's probably a healthy sign in a way, in that we were able to make a decision which was right for the time to use a product, but actually we also had a sustainable product team in place, which meant we could replace this over time if it was appropriate. At the same time, as was referred to earlier, there was a shift from tape to file-based workflows. So initially we started off with our suppliers delivering files to transmission, but eventually we took that over ourselves so that we were delivering the content to transmission itself. While this was a successful period, we also found at the time that change was more difficult than we liked. We're still very dependent on the linear schedule, so if we wanted to get something onto our catch-up platform, which wasn't on transmission, it was very cumbersome and difficult to do. We'd also only tackled a very small part of the supply chain. And when we looked across the rest of it, we realized that there was lots of still manual processes, which were email and spreadsheet-based. And we knew that these wouldn't scale, they weren't efficient. So we knew that things needed to change. We also knew that the role of technology within ITV needed to change, and we needed to be different. We needed to be no longer seen as just a service supplier, but actually we needed to be a strong partner with the business, working on a common purpose and with strong support from the business. When we looked at redesigning the supply chain, we didn't want to just lift and shift existing services to the cloud. For the amount of change that we were going to introduce, it needed to be part of a wider business transformation. So technology, operations, and the business all needed to work together on that to understand why it was going to change and how it was going to change as well. But we also wanted to be more sustainable and move away from having cycles of investments in our products and have core teams built around our core capabilities. We also needed to work better in the sense that we found ourselves sometimes in situations where we had an agile team who were getting blocked because they were coming up another external team who didn't operate in the same way. And those types of frictions led to delays which were costly, but also meant we missed out on some opportunities as well. We were running out of data centers at the time, which meant we needed to invest in infrastructure. And of course, if we needed to buy new infrastructure, the total lead time from looking to see what you need through to actually deploying it, took a while and impacted the pace at which we could move. Capacity was also a bit of a barrier for rolling out new services and meant that sometimes there was an additional cost of entry to do something. And with that upfront investment in the infrastructure, it then would subsequently sometimes limit the opportunities you had to try things in a new way because you had a sunk cost. So we wanted to ultimately get to a situation where we reduced the risk and cost associated with trying new ideas. We wanted to not overanalyze a problem, so we had to get the whole solution right first time. And where possible, we wanted to move decision-making down to the teams who were ultimately responsible for its implementation. We wanted those teams to be able to experiment, to have an idea, to test it out, and to evolve it. And all the time, we needed the teams across the supply chain to stay aligned. So we drew up what we thought the supply chain looked like. And as I said, at the time, we'd only operated in a small area, really, the asset management side of things and the delivery. Across the rest of the supply chain, we had a lot of what we called heritage systems. And in those heritage systems, it was difficult to get access to the data. The kind of existing solution for doing that was to export it, transform it, load it into systems downstream. Of course, moving that data further from where it was mastered clouded the responsibility about it and meant that how that data was used in other systems wasn't fully appreciated. Sometimes the data was also augmented as it went through the workflow, which made it even more complicated to work out what was going on. So we needed to make it easier to get access to source data. And we wanted to do this through domain APIs. So catalog, schedule, rights, assets, build up those core sets of data that we needed. To do that, we needed to get the data out of those heritage systems, because often the data was combined together, and change was difficult there. So the teams that we needed to put in place, they needed to be able to work quickly, make changes quickly, frequently, and do so without risk. They also needed to be in control of their own platforms to do so, and not have the types of frictions that we'd seen that would slow them down. We saw the cloud that would give us an opportunity to do that, to make those teams self-sufficient, so they could build and run their own products. So when we looked at forming our product teams, we looked at trying to make a multidiscipline team, and we took a DevOps model for our product teams, where the engineers would work across the entire life cycle of the product, from the development to testing, but also to deployment and operations. We brought back in-house some staff who'd worked in the heritage systems who'd been outsourced, so they could work together with the new team and on the new stack. We made a conscious decision to try and focus on the strategic capabilities that we needed to develop, and not forgetting the day-to-day improvements, which are really important to the business as well. We tried to avoid a tactical solution that might replicate an existing way of working, but just on a new platform. And to do this meant we had to get various teams across the supply chain working together. And that would help break down the silos that we had in the organization as well. We put a clear focus on the user, and took a user-centric design approach where we would discover, design, evaluate, and deploy our products. And that allowed us to spend more time with the operations teams as well and understand where they were having difficulties and come up with innovative solutions. An example of one of these would be where the users would find it difficult to see where content was, be it pre-recorded or transcoded content. So we built a little chatbot in Slack on top of our existing services that the users could just interact with. And this made a great improvements to their day-to-day work. Eventually, we got to a situation where actually operations and technology have come together as a division now within ITV in the content supply area. And I think this is it's a great recognition of how close the relationship has been between technology and operations, but also the approach we've used to look horizontally across the supply chain has allowed us to break down those barriers. Having got these teams, we needed to be able to get the best out of them, so we needed a strong foundation. And our strong foundation is missing its images, which is rather unfortunate. But believe me, they were there. Let me go back a bit. Yeah, okay. So our strong foundation basically is what we call the common platform. And this is a platform which allows us to codify our infrastructure. So it's everything through from managing our build pipeline through to how we define our infrastructure and how we have monitoring support around it. And it's given us a common set of tools, essentially, that we can use. If you want to go and look for the tools later, it's the types of things that you see on the cloud-native landscape, essentially. So it might be Jenkins, Artifactory. We use an Elk Stack for our monitoring solution as well. The way this team is operated essentially is a hub and spoke model. So there's a core team of engineers who look after the standards, essentially build out the core functions that we need to look after that platform. And then we have platform engineers embedded within each of the teams where they can actually work on the products in that specific area. And it's an approach which has worked very well for us. When it came to building out the actual supply chain itself, again, apologies, missing some imagery here in the slide as it's showing up. We use a combination of SaaS products as well as building internal applications where we needed to. And as I say, we started by building those core domain APIs to expose that data. So catalog, schedule, for instance. We started with an internal tool in the client application space called Craft. And this was a tool which would allow us to allow GE to manage the fulfillment of content internationally. And that essentially took in the catalog as well as license information from one of our legacy systems, Paris. With the addition of the schedule API, which was the UK linear schedules, Craft was then able to take over the orchestration of how we deliver content through to transmission and remove a dependency on that platform. We've also started to develop an internal application which we call Roam for managing rights. And we're using this for BritBox. And again, it's exposed via an API to our direct-to-consumer business so they can see the rights information we have for the content. And again, we're no longer dependent on our legacy Paris system for that. From a scheduling perspective, the little triangle there is a product called Mavida from Babanjo. And as it's got full visibility of the catalog, it means we're no longer dependent on the linear schedule when it comes to scheduling for VOD. We can schedule whatever we have in our catalog. From a transcoding perspective, then, we're also using Media Convert for cloud-based transcoding, and we're still using Vantage for pre-recorded catch-up transcoding as well. So we've got a combination at the moment. So, having established our product teams, adopted the cloud, exposing our core domain APIs, we still have a lot more work to do. We need to transition some of our remaining workflows to the cloud and get them into the new supply chain. We've made some good use on using our core catalog information, but we need to make that more ubiquitous across the organization, and particularly around non-audiovisual assets, so images, subtitles, audio description. We also want to start systemizing data sooner in our supply chain, so at the point at which we start to require or commission content, if we can start to systemize the data then and let it flow into the supply chain, Again, it'll make us more efficient on how we handle that content as it comes into the business. And we also want to make our rights information more visible, so our sales team have a better understanding of what they can sell in a particular territory. Ultimately, though, we want to be more flexible as a supply chain and have a lot more self-service in this as well, as far as how we receive content into the business and how we distribute this as well. So thank you very much. And apologies about the slides, missing images. Thank you.